All right. I'm Guy McPherson here with Peter Miller on the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel, and we're going to continue our conversation that has been running for, I think this is the 8th hour in the last couple of months, with a very brief interruption because I was having fun one of those weeks. And we're going to talk again about mental health, various aspects of mental health. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Peter, and please tell us about your free course in BPD. And tell us what the BPD means again, because not everybody knows.
For sure. So BPD stands, well, some people think it stands for bipolar disorder, but in the case that I'm sharing, it stands for borderline personality disorder. Sometimes those diagnoses overlap, sometimes they don't. So my course is directed towards teaching people all about emotional regulation problems, and I focus a lot on dialectical behavior therapy, which was founded by Marshall Linehan. I also go deeply into cognitive behavioral therapy, founded by Aaron Beck. And I think anyone could benefit from learning more about how we do not manage our thoughts and emotions effectively, because we don't grow up in a culture that prioritizes mental health. It's almost guaranteed, I would say guaranteed that you're not going to grow up understanding these principles, nor how to take care of yourself so that you can function effectively in relationships. And it's actually much deeper than that, because if you don't have these skills, it's very hard to have compassion on yourself. Self-love. People say just love yourself, but it's not just as simple as that. If you don't have the understanding of the cultural context and the skills that you missed in your childhood development, it's almost impossible. You can't just force self-compassion and self-love. It's like saying, just don't be depressed. You need to understand the bigger picture. And the course, I think, does really well with that. It's not perfect. And there's many other people like me who have suffered and offered resources and are continuing to do so. So it's just one of many, but it's at freebpdcourse.com. And I'm really happy to say, since I've been talking with Guy, we're now up to 37 or 38 registrations. People who are actually taking the time to discover themselves in this way, and I hope will ease their suffering as they continue.
That's great. That's a significant number of people, and this is one of the things we just don't talk about in this society: emotional health. We sitting around the dining room table, we never talked about anything that was important when I was a kid. Right? We never talked about emotional health. We never talked about personal health, physical health. We never talked about bodily functions. That was considered taboo. We never talked about money and how you make a living in the world. That was taboo as well. There's just all these things that all of us do, and mostly on a daily basis, we never talk about.
Yeah, it's strangely omitted. And people often, one of the most common things I hear in my practice, after I've gotten to know somebody a little bit, after 2 or 3 sessions, they say, I just don't know how to do that. I just don't know how to work through my emotions. I have no understanding or skill whatsoever in that regard. And they're just honest, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like I'm just making this up. Like, I've met with thousands of people. I've been in practice for 12 years now. It's an average amount of time, I suppose, and I'll probably continue until I retire. So I'll go another 12 or 13 years. But anyway, you wouldn't believe how often people say, I just don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not surprised. Again, it's one of those things that we just never talk about. So we grow up, we go away to college, and we don't know anything. We're just becoming mature adults when we're, say, 18 years old or so, going to college, and we've never had a conversation that really matters about our personal health, about our emotional health, about sex, about drugs, never mind rock and roll, right? So we have to learn all these things from people who also don't know anything because they never talked about it at their house either.
The blind
I
dating
mean,
the blind.
we
Absolutely.
never talked about death. Death was completely taboo in my family. It was as if nobody was ever going to die. So we just never talked about it.
Hmm. And
And
which
I know this isn't a diagnosis, but that's crazy.
and this platform is, I think, uh kind of captain, if you will, for being honest about what we are actually faced with in life, given the human systems and the predicaments that we create, and the way we fail to deal with paradoxes, I would say. Um, and I was going to add one more thing about health and mental health. Oh, most people assume that they can, and I'm the same. I'm no different than anybody else out there. Most people assume they can handle adult relationships and the pressures, the stresses, all the emotions that go with it. We dive in as though we think we just inherited, like by osmosis, these abilities, but it's a total lie. Um, and why would their divorce rate be so high? Why would people continue to access mental health over and over and over? Like I've said this in previous discussions with Guy. Our caseloads are endless, and we sometimes we sit around as therapists and we're like, what is happening with society? Why is it like this? There's millions of people trying to help. There's programs, offerings, resources galore, right? But our caseloads never go down. So I mean, you have to ask what in the world is going on here. And I conclude often that we are living in a dysfunctional system that will not relent and will not recognize itself as it is. That it's torturing us. It's torturing us in the name of uh, increased profits.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's disaster capitalism that is destroying every aspect of our personal lives and of our entire society. This culture is badly damaged, and it has been for at least a couple of 100 years. And so
And yeah,
all we can't fix that as individuals or even as a community. We can't fix society. It's beyond repair at this point. But we can fix ourselves. We can make ourselves emotionally healthy so that we can carry on our days.
I'm going to put one qualifier on that, and that is if you have the courage. I had a recent post with some people on Facebook, and I was talking about medical doctors. My opinion is that they are largely complicit in that they do their jobs and they are generally probably caring people, but they don't actually question the system. They don't go deeper. They don't say, why would we have endless patients, right? Why would people keep falling into these illness patterns? They don't question the system, and therefore, I think they are complicit and cowards, which is different than
Absolutely.
my friend to the left of me. Maybe he's to the right of you, which is Guy McPherson, who has had the balls to speak out. So thank you, Guy.
And that comes at considerable cost, as you're well aware,
Well,
emotionally and physically.
if you're going to follow some sort of ethics, which I assume you try to do, aren't general practitioners supposed to try and do the same?
That's the story. That's right there.
Psychologists, we're supposed to try and be ethical. So if we notice a problem and ignore it, that's unethical.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, there's lying by commission that we're all familiar with, right? So I tell my mom I'm going to go to the store and get milk, and then I don't come back for 4 hours and I forgot the milk. So that's lying by commission. But then there's also lying by omission. We know things, medical doctors know things, psychologists know things, and they just won't go there emotionally because it's uncomfortable. And like I said, when I was growing up, my entire family, we didn't touch on anything that might be uncomfortable. Just because it's uncomfortable? Wow.
So I guess my argument is that I don't know if you really are subscribing to your ethics as a professional, then you, even if you are going to continue in your profession, you at least have an obligation to speak out against the patterns that you see day to day to day to day, right? Like people like me, we meet with so many people, it's impossible to not notice patterns. Doctors, they must notice patterns in the way that people become unwell.
We
Yes,
are,
the
they have
difference is they don't say out loud what they are seeing. They kind of throw their hands in the air and say, well, there's nothing I can do. It's just the way the system is.
right.
Which I think, I'm sorry, but you're a coward.
Yeah, we are pattern seeking animals. That's what we do, along with most other animals. And yet medical doctors can't find that pattern.
And one
Or
of the
maybe,
more grotesque applications of being a doctor is if you say, well, it's in God's hands. There's nothing I can do.
and,
This
but most
person,
of
this
the
person's suffering horrendously. You know, I feel so helpless and powerless. There's nothing I can do. We have to just put it in God's hands. What
and
a
yet
fucking
and
joke.
yet and yet most of the time those same physicians play God. And they know they are playing God because they're doing things to another human being that will affect their not only their health but their continued survival. So we frequently refer to physicians and to medical doctors as people who are playing God. And
Well,
so to say they're going to put it in God's hands, that's
yeah,
in their hands, right?
that's quite a cop out, actually.
Yes.
When it's convenient, I'll just say, well, I'm going to put it in God's hands. When when it would require me to discuss and face systems issues, I'm going to suddenly put it in the all magical, almighty. It's so grotesque. That's why I admire Guy. Like I don't know why people can't understand that. He put it all on the line to not be a coward. So I respect you for that reason. Now we were going to talk about
Yeah.
also narcissism. This is a common term that's thrown around by people all the time. I do think it actually is relevant and it plays a role, but people throw it around kind of willy-nilly. Maybe you can tell me some of your stories where people have tossed that label at you.
Oh yeah. When I was speaking on tour a lot, very frequently, I was accused of being narcissistic because I was predicting based on the peer-reviewed literature where we were headed. So we're headed for a planet with little or no habitat for human animals, and that makes me a narcissist because I'm indicating based on things that I've read where we're headed. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I used to make jokes about it, and then my good friend Kevin in New Zealand told me making jokes at my own expense was not a good idea. It just feeds the idea that people are going to continue doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
If I make a joke about what's happening to me, then they'll continue the joke fest.
Oh, they might think you agree with it, maybe, or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sarcasm does not play well in this society.
So how did they think you were a narcissist? What was the explanation there?
I was predicting that our species, our most intelligent, most special species on the planet, was going to go extinct. Like every other species, or essentially every other species, more than 99% of the species that have occupied this planet are now extinct. 8 species in the genus Homo, which is the genus we're in, Homo sapiens, 8 previous species within our genus, at least 8 that we know about, have also gone extinct. So it only makes sense to believe that we are destroying the habitat we need to survive. And so as a consequence, we too will go extinct. But people thought that was narcissistic because I was predicting something about the most intelligent, most special of animals that couldn't possibly be true,
Right.
right? We're
So
better than
the most special people can't make mistakes, right? And if you are fully narcissistic, you will never admit to being wrong. And I've met with people in therapy like this where they, no matter how much I try to kind of open up the doors to alternative interpretations and viewpoints, they will always go back to being the victim and that the other people made their life a problem, that they had no contribution whatsoever to whatever issues in relationships, issues in their life overall, right? It's sort of the no blame stance. I will never take blame. I will never be the villain ever, right? If you're fully clinically narcissistic, it's actually in my experience relatively rare. I think I've only met with like 4 or 5 in all of the thousands of people I've met with. So it's to be at that extreme, is relatively rare. And when I meet with those people, I often conclude to myself, there really is no point in me wasting my breath because no matter how hard I try to open their awareness and bring about just the tiniest bit of self-reflection, they will not latch on. They will always spin it to say it's somebody else's fault.
that's interesting. So they're not they're not intellectually capable of taking responsibility for themselves.
It's just it's like a reflexive thing. So if I was to say, what was your part in this problem, right? They can't do it. They will always
Right.
spin it back to it was the other person's fault in what they did. So, I mean, if most mature, reasonable people can agree that problems in human life are mutual, right? Like it takes two to tango, or more.
Right.
So we each play a role with our own dysfunction in creating chaos and conflict, but they will not go there. I mean, look at our number one poster boy, Trump, right? Like he will never admit to being in the wrong ever. Um, and gosh, I hope he would hear me just once. You are such a clinical, malignant narcissist. You will never admit to being in the wrong. And that distinguishes you from everybody else. You are fully narcissist because everyone is imperfect. So are you, Trump. You know. Anyway,
I,
he won't do that. He would rather call people deranged and degrade them than own even the tiniest bit of responsibility.
right. And that's the response, right? That's what people do when they refuse to take responsibility for themselves. They shift the blame. They point at somebody else, always.
Right. It's blame other people, and if that doesn't work, degrade them. Well,
Hmm.
it's lies and degrading. Watch for it, right? Like if someone is fully narcissistic, they will lie, lots of lies about why they don't have any culpability. And if that doesn't work, they will switch to degrading.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like like Trump would say, you're the worst reporter I've ever encountered, right? Like stupid shit like that. Like it's degrading, lies degrading. And then they get their stupid posse behind them where they think, like have you ever seen some of those videos where Trump has a stupid posse behind him? And
No,
they're
no,
like,
I
yeah, Trump,
can't.
you're
I
like
can't.
you're like the best, Trump, and like we're totally with you. It's like the Back to the Future gang, right?
I just can't do it. I just can't watch that stuff. I got
But
enough going on in my life.
I've never seen Guy McPherson fall into that clinically narcissistic paradigm. You are always open to admitting that you're wrong. You would say
Hmm.
the research might be wrong. I might be wrong.
And
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 so
about everything I say, I would love to be wrong. And there's a a great case in which I was actually. The annual review series of peer-reviewed journals. Each part of the series, each journal in the series comes out once a year, typically in January. So there was this paper in the annual review of Earth and Planetary Sciences, came out in 2012, and they projected an ice-free Arctic Ocean in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. And so I used that as a basis for my predictions. So I predicted that as a result of an ice-free Arctic Ocean, we would go extinct in 2017, I think it was, maybe 2018. I'm astonished that I can't remember, because I'm reminded of it every day that I made a mistake. Somebody sends me an email message and said, "You idiot, right? You made this mistake. Why are you talking at all?" And so I predicted that as a result of the ice-free Arctic Ocean, which we know would be the greatest environmental change with civilizations present on the planet. So when we have an ice-free Arctic and we go from bright white like this to dark blue like this, we know that that's going to have serious consequences for habitat around the globe in a relatively short period of time. And since I was on tour and was making those predictions, the peer-reviewed literature has caught up and has indicated that that's the case. But too late to benefit me. So that's why, and so I admit I was wrong, and really quite happy about it. And I'm wrong. I was wrong because the peer-reviewed literature was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
The specific case, the paper was called "The Future of Arctic Sea Ice," and it was written by Wisław Masłowski and 3 other colleagues. And so you can find it, and you can find this projection. It's pretty interesting because, so 2016, plus or minus 3 years, the corporate media, places like USA Today and that sort of thing, put out papers as soon as that information became available, with headlines like 84 years ahead of schedule, right? Like Earth has a schedule, and that schedule includes not having ice-free Arctic until the year 2100, because everything happens in the year 2100. So 84 years ahead of schedule, that was what 2016 meant. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, we haven't had an ice-free Arctic Ocean yet. And now there's the same group of scholars led by Wisław Masłowski at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, has created a very scientifically conservative approach to predicting when there will be an ice-free Arctic Ocean. So in early April each year, they release the findings and indicate how low the ice is going to fall this year, how much ice there will be at the minimum. And that's typically in mid to late September. This year it was on September 17th, when we bottomed out at about 4.5 million square kilometers of ice floating on the Arctic Ocean. So we weren't really very close, fortunately. Next year could be another story. The year after that could be another story. But that's the event that we have the least control over as individuals and as a society, that will dictate loss of habitat for our species. It's really, really important. And so I've been trying to focus on that with my presentations lately, and my videos and my writing. But because I made that mistake of relying on similar information several years ago, I haven't been well received for a long time, which is understandable, because once somebody gets something wrong, one thing wrong, then surely they got to be wrong about everything, right?
So as I'm hearing you tell me these experiences and stories of being accused in this way, and how you've at the same time tried to be authentic and honest about what you're uncovering. And as a psychologist, like someone who has some experience, and I think I'm at least half seasoned now, I would say shut up. Like, don't even go there with Guy at this point. Unless you can somehow parallel him with the absurdity of someone like Trump, then don't even go there. Like, because he's trying to be honest about what he is talking about. He's open to being flawed, being wrong. He's even happy to be wrong because it would extend our existence, right?
Exactly. I'd love to be wrong about almost everything I present. It's
Mhm.
all rooted in the peer-reviewed literature, and occasionally the people who write those papers when they give an opinion. For example, Jennifer McKinnon at the University of California, San Diego, and also Scripps Institute, actually the Scripps Institution, which is part of the Scripps Institute. She predicted we'd have an ice-free Arctic Ocean 2 years ago. And then James Anderson at Harvard predicted we have an ice-free Arctic Ocean this year. He said there's basically a 0% probability that it won't be ice-free at this point. Well, we made it through another year. So these people are wrong. And
The bottom line, long term is, with our continued buy-in to the narrative, the American dream narrative and the religious narrative and blah, 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 like all of that buy-in is going to influence our behavior, that we are going to thaw the ice because of the endless greenhouse gases that we emit, whether by regular vehicles or through Teslas that burn more coal, right? Because we got to power those cars somehow. It's still going to melt.
Right.
And all of this talk about exploiting the Arctic and all the fisheries, and like, come on. The bottom line is, when all of that melts, what's going to happen, Guy? What's going to happen? What's going to come up underneath? There's something that's going to come up.
Well, first and most importantly, and the peer-reviewed literature has focused on this aspect, I think, properly and importantly, is the change in albedo or reflectance. We go from a huge amount of incoming solar radiation of sunlight being reflected back out into space. So we don't even heat the planet. It's the greenhouse gases that trap the heat. But if you don't heat the planet to begin with, then there's no heat to trap. So when we switch from that ice-covered Arctic Ocean, the white color that is reflecting a bunch of that sunlight before it can warm the planet, we turn that to a dark blue. That's problematic. And so the paper so far have focused just on that reflectance. It's called albedo. And that alone would be enough to cause a tremendous increase in energy trapped within the system, therefore in global heating. It would happen very quickly. Never mind the methane almost certainly to be released from the East Siberian Arctic Shelf. The East Siberian Arctic Shelf is the largest continental shelf in the world. It's very shallow. It heats up a little bit. The methane is going to be released from the clathrates, or the ice cages that it's currently trapped in. Those ice cages melt, the methane gets released. Methane is more than 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is, molecule for molecule, in the relatively short term, meaning within the first few years. So this is tremendously important. And that's just an aside beyond the things that scientists are talking about, which is to focus almost exclusively on that reflectance or albedo. And then once you get methane release, it contributes even further to the self-reinforcing feedback loop, because the more methane you release, the warmer it gets, more methane is released. So the ice melts faster, more methane is being released from these shallow continental shelves. Then we get into the arena of how is that going to affect industrial activity when people can no longer carry out the sorts of mechanical activities that we do, building cars and a million other things that we just take for granted on a daily basis. What happens when we have a reduction in that industrial activity because people are dying, because the planet is heating up, because we can't keep up, blah, 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 right? And so then we have loss of aerosol masking, really accelerates the heating. It goes on and on.
Right. And if people would just have the courage to elaborate on the facts, like just how you just did. But people would rather lie and stay in denial and carry on some kind of fantasy script about the human life and experience. They would rather do that than actually just be honest about the facts. I can't tell you the depth of my disgust about that.
Well,
It's just so deep. Like I could throw up right now on command.
we all like to be liked, right? Walt Whitman here. Walt Whitman said, I have learned that to be with people I like is enough. We all want to be liked. We want to be adored, actually. And so nobody's going to do what I'm doing. Nobody's going to tell the full truth, which is it doesn't exactly make somebody's day when I tell them that they're going to die in the relatively near future. That's one of the things we never talk about in this culture. We never talk about death, ours or anybody else's. It's like we all knew when we were teenagers that we were going to die. We figured that out. I figured it out when I was 11 because my grandmother died. I barely knew her, but I cried for weeks. And I reflected back on that and I thought, I wasn't crying for her. I was
But
crying.
what's the one thing you're offering that all the other professionals, doctors, various professionals, what's the one thing that you are offering that they are not? It's respect, is it not?
Yes. Yes.
You're willing to say this is what it is. It's sad. It sucks. But I'm not gonna sit here and lie to your face and encourage you to dive deep into delusion so that you can just carry on with the dictates of the system. I'm going to tell you what it is. I knew that when I read Going Dark. That's why I respected Dr. Guy McPherson, because he wasn't a bullshit artist. And narcissists worldwide, wherever you are on the spectrum, you are a bullshit artist. You are good at coming up with bullshit to cover up the facts. And you are doing none of us a service, none. So whatever the likes of Michael Mann or similar scientists who come up with all kinds of trivialities and ways of minimizing the problem, like how do you deserve respect? Seriously, you know?
Oh, that reminds me. Just within the last couple of weeks, I remain on LinkedIn because it's the so-called professional platform, right? And whenever anybody favorably mentions Michael Mann, I stop following them.
Mm-hmm.
If they mention him or one of a handful of other people, I know that they've been duped. They think that this is a real scientist. So I can't follow that person anymore. Why would I bother? I'm
How
still trying to
can
get
I'm
still
so
trying to get this
baffled,
right.
Guy? How can they dismiss the consequences of a melting Arctic? How do they do it?
Because they say it will not happen for another 100 years or whatever USA Today said back in the day.
But
But of course, it's going to happen relatively soon. And even the peer reviewed literature indicates it's going to happen relatively soon. Never mind the people who produce those papers. James Anderson is a pretty famous atmospheric scientist. He led the team that discovered the link between chlorofluorocarbons and the so-called hole in the Antarctic. Right. So this is a smart man. And he said there's essentially a 0% chance that we would not have an ice-free Arctic this year. In other words, basically a 100% chance that we would have an ice-free Arctic Ocean this year. Well, he was wrong, fortunately, for all of us. And I suspect he'd be willing to admit that he was wrong if somebody asked him about it. I don't know that anybody has or will. And so to believe that we will not experience an ice-free Arctic Ocean in the relatively near term, and also that won't have consequences, that's absurd. I just
is this not it? It's like willfully lying, coming up with a deluded narrative, willfully, right, to persuade the masses to continue going along with a tyrannical industrial system. Why would you
Yes.
do that? Why would you do that? Why would you not have the ethics or the honesty or the integrity? What the fuck is wrong with you? Sorry.
Well, Professor Mann does have a teenage daughter, so maybe he wants to protect her and everybody else on the planet from the truth.
By promoting a delusion. This is what
That
I'm
makes
wondering.
no sense to me. I know that makes no sense, but I don't have children, and I recognize that having children has consequences for the way people think about the future.
So they would rather lie and be deluded to protect their children from emotions they might not like or realities they might not like. They would rather lie.
And
As,
here's the worst part about that whole scenario. The lie is going to be discovered. It always is, and especially when it comes to natural sciences and phenomena like an ice-free Arctic Ocean. Of course, that's going to happen in relatively near term. To protect your children from that information is not protecting them at all. What about when it happens?
well, you know
Then
what? I have actually a lot of experience with things coming
then
to
your
light.
child is going to come up and is going to say, "You lied to me. Why did you lie to me?" It's
I
an
have a
ice-free
lot of
Arctic
experience
Ocean.
in this regard. Let me explain. When people
Please.
when people come to therapy and they're 30 or 40 years old and they realize they haven't learned a goddamn thing about mental health through their whole childhood development and elsewhere, they suddenly realize I never had what I needed to be healthy ever. I never learned a thing about relationships. I never learned a thing about mental health. Now I'm wondering why it's failing. Now I'm wondering why we can't have an enjoyable, civil, peaceful, the dance of life. We can't do it. I guess you'd have to be in my occupation, to really get the frustration. How many times do you have to see people have been set up for failure to be furious? I've been, I've been like, I haven't expressed my ferocity very well because of my own passion. Sometimes I really, really, really want to just yell, and I have. But people, they really don't get how the system is so steeped in neglect and how we have disregarded our sacred patterns of connection and health because of industrial civilization. So it comes to light literally every day in mental health. And I can't wait for Guy to get his opportunity.
You know, it's pretty interesting because occasionally I get an email message that says, "You must be very pleased. You get to say I told you so," because things are really falling apart and people are starting to notice now that in the natural world things are actually falling apart. And you don't have to look very far to read articles that indicate exactly that. And I'm not happy about this, right? My partner certainly isn't happy about this. She's got kids. I realized in 1979 when I was 19 years old that the world was falling apart already. And so I decided at that point not to have children. I was with my ex for more than 35 years. She's a Midwestern Catholic. Convinced her to not have children. That's amazing. She's the
That's amazing.
youngest. She's the youngest of 6 children herself. And that's just sort of the mentality, right? Have children, have children, have children. And so I feel some sense of gratification that I don't have children, seeing what's happening right now as things are unraveling, we'll say. And it's not going to get better. It's like George Carlin and the routines he did right before he dies. It's not going to get any better. Everything's going to get worse, and then it's going to get worse. Of course it is, because this is a very intricate living planet we have, in which so many species, including ours, depending upon so many other species for their own survival. You start unraveling that sweater, you never know which string you pull out is going to be the one that causes the arm to fall off, or both arms to fall off, or for the whole sweater to collapse in a heap.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been unraveling the sweater for my entire life. Probably we can take it all the way back to 1750 or earlier with the Industrial Revolution.
And it's amazing that we can actually keep our composure. Actually, if you have been seeing the realities like I have in my field, you see it in your field, and people continue to willfully ignore the realities. It's so frustrating to have to continue carrying on like that, you know? Like, why not just honestly admit the impact that you're having and where your decisions, what they're based in? Like, which is I'm sorry to say, but I think it's the deluded patriarchal belief systems that people are steeped in, whether or not they go to church every Sunday, it doesn't matter. Society still finds a way to get into your head that way, you know, whether through the holidays, the traditions, whatever.
And
it's like
people,
it's like you're a Christian, whether you're Christian or similar Abrahamic religion, whether or not you want to be.
absolutely. And people have integrity whether they're involved in a religion or not, right? And people don't have integrity, and it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or Catholic or fill in the blank, right? So some people do and some people don't. It doesn't have anything to do with going to church every Sunday.
No, we fall into the patterns they have prescribed as normal. And I'm sad to say that everything I think I've learned about life has fit into that patriarchal paradigm. Every way that I've learned to survive is in there. And it sucks, but I don't know any other way to live. And I'm just lucky. I'm just lucky enough in my life where I've learned enough about psychology and had caring colleagues to help me see where I was falling into severely dysfunctional patterns consistently, and that I could learn enough to be able to at least function in this disgusting dysfunction that we are all faced with and have no way of getting out of unless we are going to somehow go off grid, be a person in the wilderness, or be homeless, which almost nobody wants to go that way because their chances of survival would diminish by 98%, right? And they'd have to abandon everyone and everything they've ever known.
And I lived off grid for more than a decade because I thought that would be leading the way in showing a solution, getting as far removed as I could from industrial civilization. And then I learned about aerosol masking, best kept secret in climate science. And I realized that living off grid was no answer, and it also prevented me from sharing important information with people. So I tried to reverse that strategy poorly.
Remember, I told you I think I reached out to this other interviewer. She interviews all kind of climate scientists, like Bill Rees and other people you've talked about. And I said, why don't people talk about aerosol masking effects? As point blank asked her that question. What do you think I got in response?
I can't even imagine.
Crickets. Nothing.
There's a reason it's the best kept secret in climate science. Nobody will talk about it. It's really, really important.
Because it's the linchpin on our paradox or predicament,
Absolutely.
right? It's like if you put that in, you would say we're stuck. Sorry, but once you put that into the mix or the recipe, there's no fun way out of this.
Absolutely. So you got paid climate scientists, media personalities, and government officials all saying the same thing. You have to reduce emissions. And none of them are doing that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look at what
Yeah,
I do, not what I say.
right.
Right?
And I would generally say, stop lying. Like, it's just like, stop. And that's the narcissism. Narcissism is lying and degrading, lying and degrading. You start out with lies. If that doesn't work, you switch to degrading. So they are hell bent on lying, lying, lying to try and reach their ends. But it is a pathetic and disgusting way to be human. Sorry, I'm being so blunt. Um,
Yeah.
even in the religious scriptures, they say liars are going straight to hell, but they do it all day long. Sorry.
How I disdain bluntness.
Yeah, right. Well, me and you are like comrades in that way, I think. So
Exactly.
we're willing to be blunt. I'll say what needs to be said. I'll call a spade a spade. If you don't like it, to hell with you. I'm going to call a spade till my last breath. If you're going to ask me to lie and follow a deluded narrative, I'd rather eat dog shit. Sorry.
You don't have to apologize to the dog. The dog was done
Yeah.
with that.
Well, I just don't understand why people don't have, like, am I really putting myself on a pedestal when I say that? Or am I just saying I'm trying to be a decent human being? I think Guy's trying to be a decent human being. Are we putting ourselves on a pedestal by trying to have
No,
integrity? Like, are
no,
we being
no.
narcissistic? Like, come on.
But the people who are lying by omission or commission are the favored people. They're telling us that it's all going to be fine.
Yeah, anything to make the emotions easier. Whatever makes
Right.
emotional experience easier, you're my hero. Except you're a freaking liar.
Yes. Right. So, oh, there's this line. See if I can remember how it goes. People love it when you tell the truth and tell you truth about them. When you do that, you're an a-hole,
Mm, right,
right?
yes. No. Yes,
And
people, it's a sad fact about our species. I think on large, is that a word? On large, en masse, we line up for the lies. We don't like the uncomfortable truth. We don't like it.
absolutely.
We would rather feel comfortable and less anxiety than actually face what's the reality is. Um,
And we're all guilty. I love ice cream and it's good for me. It's not good for the rest of you.
yeah, right. Guy's a liar in that case. But and I'm a liar too, I suppose. I admit to being human, but at least I'm trying to face it, like kind of say, well, Peter, that's a lie, and that's a lie. And when you did that, that was a lie. When you're engaged in that kind of pattern, you're creating toxicity for yourself and everyone around you. Like, why don't I think I've developed a small amount of courage to do that. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I think that's actually what it takes if you're going to communicate an honest message. And if everything that you've learned in the health sciences or biological sciences or earth sciences, if you're going to be the slightest bit honest, you need to have that willingness. I like the word willingness, like you're willing to walk through the fire. You're willing to walk through the fire of your human patheticness, I guess, like
Yeah,
I'm willing to do that. Like not all the time, but by and large, I'm trying to do it. It's called self-reflection.
Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a book called All Too Human. And one of the things he described in there was the shortcomings of all of us human animals. We are all too human because we have a propensity for lying, because we have a propensity for not telling the full truth, because we live our lives in a way that is dishonest to ourselves and to others. And of course we
Mhm.
do. But
At the long-term consequence of our children. Sorry, but
yes,
that's what
yes.
we're destroying their future because we would rather lie and not feel any discomfort.
And he
Not
was
feel,
And
Go ahead.
Nietzsche was pointing out that there are consequences of being all too human. And maybe we should try to head those off by being decent human beings from the
And the
outset.
thing is, and the thing is, no one can make you do it. And that's the sucky part about mental health. Like, I can't make anybody be healthy. They have to want it, right? Like,
Right.
it's like any kind of health, physical health. No one can make you do it, right? And if we want a better world, and if we want to have a better experience with one another, and whether it's ride this out to the end of our oblivion or try and by some miracle have a chance of creating something new, we have to be willing to engage in that work.
Well,
I guess which would lead me to segue into the course. Like, take a look, just take a look at some of the processes and practices, and you don't even have to use my work. There's another great woman in the internet named Debbie Corso, and she runs a BPD program, a very nice woman, and she's been through the same hell as me. But anyway, that's just one example. There's many. But like, just take a look at what you have missed about how to be human, you know?
I think that's a great place to wrap this up by mentioning your course
Yeah.
and how each of us, if we're willing to take that step to admit that the society we live in ain't all it's cracked up to be, and that we can be better human beings. And so far, you said you've found 36 or 37 people who are trying to make themselves better human beings in the world,
Or
right?
at least start, you know, like my course might just be the beginning of more awareness and more enlightenment. And if that's just all it functions as, I'm fine with that. If it takes you all the way, great. But you know,
Right. And so one more time, mention your course, and then
uh, it's called
look forward.
freebpdcourse.com. It just starts with a brief information pamphlet about me and how I worked through my issues and how I'm still working through my issues because I don't think will ever reach a point of total perfection. And I am human and prone to digression, but you know, I'm still trying to practice the same things that brought me to a better place uh, than I was before. There's nothing worse than living in ignorance, you know, and Guy is trying to lead you out of ignorance, and I guess in a way, in a big way, so am I. He's trying to lead you out of environmental, ecological ignorance. I'm trying to lead you out of mental, psychological, and I think sociological ignorance, so that you can understand your life in a proper perspective instead of uh, the the joke of a perspective that your society has offered.
Well, and let's admit it. What we're doing is difficult because we all know the expression, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. Well, you can choose
Okay.
that path if you like, but you won't earn my respect. Sorry.
Right. So let's wrap it up there. Let's wrap it up right there. Remember, freebpdcourse.com. Take a look, take a few steps in the direction of improving your life and the lives of the people around you. That's what I would say.
Thanks, guy.
Look forward to next time, Peter.
For sure.